Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Diversity Podcast with George Simons. Today, we're going to try and define culture. What is culture and what does it mean? George is going to tell us his view on it.
Yes, that's me. I've been many years in the intercultural business, starting in graduate school back in the 1960s, dealing with the racial revolution that was going on in the United States at that time. I'm a U.S. American by birth, but I've lived most of my life outside of the U.S., the last 30-some years now in France. So I'm very fascinated by the topic of culture. I felt like I was enriched by the fact that I grew up in what was called the melting pot in the United States, where you could walk a few blocks and you'd be hearing people speak another language, and you'd find a church or a mosque of a different denomination, and all the little stores that had ethnic things in them. So that was a real gift, and my father always was really good to me in terms of saying, don't be afraid of people who are different from you. Try anything twice. The first time might be a fluke. So basically, one of the biggest obstacles to becoming culturally competent is, generally speaking, our own resistance to difference, our own reactions to difference. And my father was really good at replacing that sort of spontaneous feeling that most of us have with a spontaneous feeling of curiosity. So my curiosity kicks in early, and that makes me interested in other people.
Yeah.
So it raises the question of, what is culture?
Yeah.
And to me, my great discovery about what culture was occurred when I was working with Fernando Flores, who was at one time the Minister of Economy in Chile, I believe. And with the fall of the government there, he wound up in the United States doing workshops and teaching in universities and so on. And he made me aware of the fact that we as human beings are basically always talking to ourselves. In other words, we may actually hear our voices talking to ourselves, but we're also producing feelings, insights, and pictures, and so on. Your head is constantly doing that, and it's doing it all the way throughout your body, because your neural system is all a part of you. So what does this imply? Well, what we discover now, and this is one of the gifts of neuroscience, is that, first of all, our culture is us. It's our neurons, our system working. And what it does is that it is the place where stories are heard. We're brought up with fresh stories in our infancy about who we should be, what we should be like. Our experiences give us new stories to reflect on. We share these stories with each other. We create big stories about what the world is like. How do we succeed and survive in this environment, in this group, in this country, in this neighborhood, in this nature? So basically, when we're talking about culture, we're talking about that inner conversation of identity that we all have going on and can actually share with each other. So that's the second area here that we're interested in, is that when I start telling my story, your neural system starts following that. We are connected. And then you tell me your story, and we are connected in a way. One of my colleagues, Cindy Egolf, who is the director of a symphony orchestra, has been working on the idea of leadership. And she points out that people who are musicians often can sense how people are listening to their music in the very context of live music.
Yeah.
And the point that is really important here is that this connection is possible all the time, and then the question is, what do we do with it? So what has happened to me in this process is that with this realization that we make our decisions on the basis of who we are rather than this is a good idea, this is a bad idea. When I was studying psychology, my prof made a very good point once upon a time. She said, if you need a reason, anyone will do, you know? And what we're learning now is that when you propose something to me, I see some advertisement or something like that, if it speaks to my identity, I'm open to it. And of course, this is one of the things that's frightfully powerful in the populism politics that we're experiencing around the world today, because people are telling stories that other people share and then do not share with other people, and it becomes a question of us versus them.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's the background of how I look at culture.
The stories that we tell ourselves.
The stories that we tell ourselves.
It's like Fernando also says, Fernando Flores, the Chilean. Human beings are born into a world of conversations already going on.
Right. And as a matter of fact, one of the little cartoons that I use when I give a presentation about this on a slide, it's a mother talking to her pregnancy and playing music for it, the little kid that's inside of her. So it may even start before we have our first breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
And that's so. Yes, that's what it is, and that has led me to the work that I do.
What's the work that you do?
Well, the work that I do is often doing workshops and training sessions and lectures on identity, on communication, on negotiation, and so on. But at the core of it is the fact that we are effective when we share our stories with each other, and other people share their stories with us in a safe context, okay? Not in the violence of an us versus them manifestation of some sort, but when we open up in a safe space, so you see how I experience this in my world, I see how you experience it in your world, I see how we both experience it maybe with some coordination, or maybe with none whatever, a very different view of how our worlds work.
Yeah.
And this is devising, the key of my work has become a series of games, rather a process than a series of games, but it shows up in that fashion.
Yeah. Whereby
people are given cards, either virtual or real.
It's a card game.
It's a card game.
Yeah.
But we've adapted to the digital world here, so that you can play it on your iPhone.
Digital cards.
Yeah. So it raises a question upon which a group of people then share their stories about, what does this mean to me, or do I know about this, or what am I curious about this, with each other.
Yeah.
And that is, to me, the very root of cultural competence, your ability to recognize your own story, to share your story, to hear the story of someone else and listen to how they tell it and why they tell it. In other words, really good listening skills about that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then to look at what are the benefits of how each of our stories contributes to the world that we're in, and can we learn something from each other, adopt something from each other, create a bigger, better story together, and so on.
And that's what I want to ask you, actually, because each story is different for each person.
Sure.
That they've been told as a child or and when growing up. But what's the problem when somebody doesn't recognize the fact that there are different stories outside of their country or outside of their family even? What happens?
This is the challenge. I mean, what we talk about is that the recent book on slow and fast thinking, Coleman, okay, has pointed out that our system is constantly producing what we have to help us understand reality, okay? And this is a precious, precious gift, this this ability because it saves our lives half the time, you know. You know, if I'm crossing the street and the light turns red, my system doesn't say anything about this. It just alerts me to this.
That's the fast thinking.
That's
the fast
and
one.
the fast thinking. However, we all grow up with limited perspectives, particularly about other people. Okay, and almost everybody grows up with we're better and they're not so good, or you know, the different. And when we're talking
like football.
about, well, exactly, because see, when we're talking about our biases about other people or our cultures, you know, my family has a culture, my school has a culture, you know, the different generation of my kids has a culture, and all of these are a fermentation of stories going on all the time. And the ability to listen to those, to understand them, to discern them, to see what advantages there are in them and what sometimes risks there are in them, and share these with each other, is really what I call cultural competence.
Yeah, and when you say your school has a culture and your family has a culture, that means actually that you behave differently in each setting, right? In each culture you have a different pattern, a different story.
Well, I like that one of our new games is called Diversity Togs, like clothing, and it's about how clothes are used to present our identity.
Yes.
You know, and one way to think about this is that, you know, you wake up in the morning, you open your closet, and you ask yourself, not what should I wear today, but who am I today? Okay. And of course, it's a very simple metaphor for the process, but we're constantly looking at where does my identity, what role does my identity, or what part of my identity forms the role in this context where I'm going, talking with you, talking with somebody else.
Are you saying you can choose your culture by putting on a certain set of clothes, or?
You do. Yeah, you can. Well, I mean, what happens is that it's your identity speaking and driving you toward those kinds of things. But as I dress for the occasion, there's not only what I think I should be, but there's what you think I should be, there's what the world thinks I should be, you know, so we're constantly juggling these identity bits.
Yeah.
And one of the most important insights recently that's come from our understanding of neuroscience is that context is the software of the mind. In other words, how we interpret what is the context and how my identity fits into it, that's the real software of the mind. We used to say culture is the software of the mind, but the fact is culture is the data. I mean, the stuff that we've stored up that we call culture is the data, and then the software of the mind is what part of my story fits here?
Which data am I accessing?
Which story am I going to be continuing in this situation?
Okay, I like that. So you got a bunch of stories lined up in your database, in your head, and then the context is where you choose one from them and you upload it into your software, basically.
And you're constantly doing this, and of course, some of it is done in the fast thinking mode.
And just to clarify here, a context, you mean like the situation that you're in?
Yeah, I'm talking to you. Okay,
Yeah.
We're making a podcast. I have certain things in my mind going on about what's the best way to talk, to present, to connect, and so on and so forth. Okay, then I'm going to my football game, and it's okay. What do I dress for like this? What do I put on team colors? What are we going to have in the boot lunch in the automobile in the parking lot?
Yeah, and this kind of makes sense. I think most of the listeners too will understand this. You behave differently in different places in your different contexts.
Yeah. And the whole point of these stories is they are to help us survive and succeed. Now, the tricky part, the painful part of this is particularly if we have been given very limited frameworks and very limited understandings or biased understandings of other people, those are our automatic interpretations, you know. I see somebody who looks like something that I'm afraid of, and I cross the street even though they're just walking down the street pleasantly toward me, okay?
Yeah.
That may be, so context is what's going on, and sometimes it's very explicit. I'm going to a board meeting, and sometimes it's whatever's happening along the street as I'm going along. And the one of my sort of pet peeves, there's nothing I can do about it, but a lot of people who talk about diversity and intercultural differences frequently label this process as what they call unconscious bias. And it's true in the sense that bias means something that leans in one direction or another. But the problem with that is when we start talking about diversity and trying to help people to broaden their cultural perspectives, when you say unconscious bias, it sounds like an accusation. Really.
You're unconscious. Yeah.
You're unconscious, but you know what me, you know, and it creates a sense of defensiveness or denial, and frustrates the actual learning that we're trying to do.
Yeah.
So I have used the word frames or framing, which I've taken from another author in this cognitive science area, and that feels a bit better. It's like, you know, okay, when I experience something, smell something, look at something, I box it up in a frame as to, I think this is what this is. Okay. Now you could say that's unconscious bias, but it sounds a lot less accusatory and negative, you know. The other thing that we've learned, of course, from we have backed up more than 1,000 years of what we might call, at least in the West, what we might call dichotomous thinking.
Oh, that sounds difficult. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, what that means is we're brought up consciously and unconsciously to think of ourselves as mind versus matter, body versus soul, the ghost in the machine,
I see,
etc. Okay, and what that does is that it gives a negative tint to our physical reality and a positive tint to what we try to call our spiritual reality. Well, the fact of the matter is, what we've learned is that our culture is a physical, real thing. It's a whole mess of neurons that keep producing and changing and moving and so on. It's us, and it's extended through our whole body. We are integrated beings, okay? And that integration allows us to absorb and create the worlds that we live in. So it's very, very important to me to try to get rid of the sort of stigma that goes along with the word bias.
And that's what your trainings are about.
Well, basically, the way we get rid of that is hearing other people's real stories, rather than the limited or negative or fearful stories we've heard about. He's different, or she's different, or this group is, you know, this and the other thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's utterly amazing how people play, particularly in politics these days, people's identities against each other.
Yeah.
This is us and this is them, okay?
Yeah.
Well,
lots of negativity creates. What gets me thinking though, so you kind of automatically change your culture in your head, your story that you tell yourself when you change context. Right?
Yeah.
But my question is,
when the context changes, your system sets to work to say, who am I now? What's my situation?
Exactly. So why do you think businesses still need training in cultural competence? Because you're saying that they do it automatically, right? So where does it come into play that you need a consultant on cultural communication?
Let's face it. You know, when we're dealing with diversity, we're dealing with all kinds of people in our organization who have diverse backgrounds, and today, of course, this is amplified by the incredible spread of global business
Yeah.
and so on. So, you know, you come from a different world in which you may react to certain contexts differently than I do.
Yeah.
So getting to understand this is why I like the game that we play, but it helps us tell the stories. Getting to understand how you see it, how I see it, and how we both see it, or both could see it, or both could create something new about it, is possible. So.
And what goes wrong if two completely different cultures, if they connect via online or in real life? What is something that could happen if they didn't research their differences before?
Well, it's happening all the time. We have bias all over the place. You know, we've got genocide going on in Israel right now, and we've got, the rhetoric of labeling others in politics, which has become utterly ugly. All over the place, and so it's about dehumanizing the other.
Yeah.
In other words, I start using language about you that reflects less than human capacity. You know, you're a dumb donkey of some sort, or these people. Well, the kind of language that's used particularly about immigrants. Okay, they're criminals, they're rapists, they're thieves, they're threatening our economy, and I'm not just talking about my own country, the United States, but this is going on all over the place.
And do you think that comes from a misunderstanding of their culture, of their story?
It comes from a desire of power.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Of taking charge of things. I don't want to go deeply into that.
Yeah, let's do that another time, maybe.
Yeah, and I've got somebody else you could talk to who's really good at that. My associate Amna, who wrote her doctoral dissertation on the language of Donald Trump.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it's fascinating how... so, yes, but the point is that if I dehumanize you, I can abuse you, get rid of you, do without you, and so on. And, this is... I don't know what's going on in military training these days, but I can remember, when we created dehumanized names for the enemy.
Yeah.
Okay? They were whatever kind of beast, animal, lacking in human qualities in some fashion, and we created names for them that way, that they were...
You think this is a result from two very different groups of people that have, instead of deciding to open the conversation and talk to each other about their differences?
Well, that's the situation, certainly. We have labeled people in different ways. Trying to think of a few of these kind of things that they're wolves. They're
well, let's not get too deep into that. I want to get back to the topic of defining culture. One time I've heard you say, think of culture as a verb. Can you tell more about that?
Okay, there's a number of ways to address that issue. Some of my colleagues speak about culture as you need to realize that culture is not a solid but a liquid. It's something that's moving and changing. And when we say it's a verb, what we're saying is the stories have agency. They push how we behave and how we share how we behave and so on. So this is particularly useful because I think we talk about culture. Culture is essentially these inner conversations, but what we've done is we've used the word to express and describe the things that it produces. You look around my room and I have different kinds of paintings and cultural artifacts and heritage things and so on collected from my ancestors. all of this we can say is culture.
Mm-hmm.
But what makes it culture is that it is the product of a human story. I remember earlier I showed you a pencil that I had, which is over 100 years old, and it was the pencil that my dad had when he first went to high school.
It's the old Parker.
The old Parker, yeah. and you know, that was a product of the best thinking at that time for creating a nice, useful mechanical pencil,
Mm-hmm.
right? And today we have very, very different kinds of things, but they all are rooted in the stories we tell ourselves about what's this like, what can it do, how can I make it useful, how can it make life easier to survive and succeed.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, this is a very important issue because we are starting to, particularly, and there's too much in higher education. I have a colleague, Paul Schaefer, who's a Canadian, was once a minister of culture, and Paul has written a number of books about how culture has been declining in our interest in it, and how important it is for us to look at culture as to how we're going to shape our future world.
Yeah.
And it's the artists, the people who embody their culture in art, architecture,
Mm-hmm.
legal, you know, law, wherever you're embodying it. This is what art is. Art is making it visible and real in
Yeah.
some way. And what he's observing, and when it's very true, is that courses in the liberal arts have been declining enormously in education and higher education in
Mm-hmm.
universities. Okay, smaller and smaller. You know, and the basic message that most kids are getting going into the university is, well, you got to go through this so you can get a job. You know, and yes, maybe, but how rich is your job going to be? How imaginative? How creative? You know. I'm not saying that education was perfect in the past by any means, no, but I'm saying that I think we are declining in our respect for arts.
Yeah, I think
And
I can agree on that.
Well, another dimension to that, and this is what's interesting to me now, and I'm going to attack it in some way going forward, and I have a couple of other people working with me who are interested in this, is pop culture. Now, we think of culture, you know, when you say culture, you say, oh, we're going to go to the museum this afternoon, you know, or something like that. But the fact is that, you know, our concerts, our rap music, our songs, the content of that, this is an enormously powerful thing going on at different levels in different ways. And as far as I know, I rarely hear any interculturalists even address the idea of pop culture.
Pop culture. Well, it stands for popular, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
whatever's hip is pop culture.
Yeah. Well, that's another way to look at it, but it becomes hip, or it is hip, and
Or it stays hip.
Yeah, I'm just saying that there's a certain real swell of things going on
Mm-hmm.
that we're not paying attention to at all, and
No.
that's that I think is really a shame, and something that helps us. Well, it lets me jump into another topic here, which is what we call metaculture or
Metaculture.
meta-narrative, okay?
Okay, please
Now,
do tell.
the term meta-narrative was created by a French sociologist, Lyotard. And what he meant by that is meta-narrative are the big stories that we all believe in, take for common sense, do not examine, but it's the way the world runs.
Yes.
And if they're not on target, they can be destroying the world, and we have a number of those meta-narratives that we're beginning to be aware of are destroying our human ecology and our earthly ecology,
Yeah.
and may even be our suicide note to the world, you know?
But these can also differ, right, per person. These
Per
big
person
stories.
and per place. Well, the point is that if you belong to a certain group, you may swallow unconsciously the common sense of that group.
Mm-hmm.
And so it becomes part of the automatic processing of reality. And to become conscious of something else is an extremely important reality, because culture is about helping us to succeed and survive. And when the cultural story we're living out is destroying rather than creating and helping us survive, that's bad news.
Yeah.
I happen to feel like one of the gifts I had, in growing up was I was born toward the end of the Great Depression. Okay, so for the first several years of my life, my father was often, almost always unemployed, had to go search for work. He was a great woodsman, so we didn't starve to death. He could go out in the woods and come back with a few fish and wild vegetables and things like that. And
we had food,
we did very well. But it was a time when you didn't throw things away, you fixed them, you reused them, and so on. And that's my father and my two grandfathers all worked with their hands creating things. And the things that they created, were useful everyday stuff. And I was there helping them out and, finding the screws and things like that in my granddad's workshop. And what happens here is that I grew up with an attitude, and if you look around my house, you'll find some things that say, I never thought anybody could buy anything like this because, I fixed it, and it works. That's my point. I fixed it and it works. And, the fact of disposable items has become so enormous these days.
So that's a big shift in culture. From,
I feel like my refrigerator is on its last legs. And I've only had it for about 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And I remember, I don't think my mother had a refrigerator for anything less than 20 years at our home,
I think planned obsolescence.
Yeah, planned obsolescence.
Right? People use it for this many years, so why make it last?
Even more unconscious obsolescence planning,
Yeah, that is interesting. Well, so do you think we spilled some coffee? Do you think we've defined culture to your liking, or do you think it needs more?
Oh, I don't know. There's lots of things that you can spell out further.
Because there's not one definition, is there?
No, there's lots of definitions of culture, and each of them may add something.
Yeah. But
I think respecting what we've learned from neuroscience and cognitive science these days is critical, because what I see is at least an alleyway leading out of the traps that we have in so many of our, if you think, I'm not a finance person or big time capitalist or anything like that, but when you think of how you got to sell more, and survival is based on killing the competition with your sales to some degree. This is not a healthy thing in the long run.
No.
Because it's number one, creating that competitive difference, but number two, it's often exhausting the resources that are needed for many other things in our lives.
Yeah, exploiting it. Well, people want to make money, so they find a way.
And the role of money.
Yeah.
We can go throughout history and see. I have a whole book. It's about 3 centimeters thick about the history of money. The interesting thing is happening now is that money, in the sense of coins and bills, is starting to disappear. Sweden hardly ever uses. Everything is, you pull out your little card or you put your fingerprint on whatever. But the fact that we're counting in terms of money and valuing things and people in terms of money, it's important to know what it costs to create and preserve things, because maybe we can do it better and easier. But the better and easier should be not so that we can dominate the market as much as we can provide an ecological, safe and rich way of supporting people's lives. That's the thing, you know.
Yeah. Well, I think that's nice for today. So now we've defined culture. So maybe in a next episode we can discuss what it means to communicate from one culture to the other, and that's also the name of the game, right? Cross-cultural competence.
Yeah. We can go deeper into some of those topics and questions that.
Because for you, it's maybe almost difficult to imagine just what is one culture, because you've lived and worked in so many different countries. But for someone who's grown up in, let's say just the Netherlands, you know, you've lived there your whole life. You've never lived outside of the city where you were born. So
Lutjenwestedt.
Yeah, Lutjenwestedt. Yeah, something like that. You know, that's your life basically, and you're not really thinking about other kinds of living. You just go to the supermarket, you go to work, and you know, that's what you see.
Yeah, it's possible that people have very limited cultural perspectives, and that can happen any place. But we all belong to a whole variety of cultures. You know, even if your only culture is my family, my workplace, and my football team.
And do you meet these kinds of people when you give trainings? People who have a very limited perspective on different cultures?
They can show up, yeah. I mean, the point is that it's not that people are like restricted to one culture. They may be strong in the values of a certain culture, but also when people have deep cultural differences, these don't show up except when they pop out of their slow or their fast thinking.
Yeah.
And they have to look at, what does this mean? Why do I think this way? Or why do I do this? And of course, a lot of the work of interculturalists is working with organizations to help them get their personnel more culturally adjusted to each other, as well as to use the richness of the various diverse cultures that are involved in an organization. I mean,
and that's slow thinking.
Yeah,
when you really have that slow thinking.
But you know, we all have many roles in life, and our culture pops up in each one of these. You know, you can be brother, fathers, you know, sister, executive, politician, priest. You know, wherever life can take you, you can go, and that means that there will be either something in your wardrobe to wear to go there, or you got to create it. You need the story that will put it together. And you know, how do we convince other people of things? You know, you tell me your story in a powerful way, and I want to be like you. Maybe.
If the story is good.
Stories do it. It's the stories that are the.
But if it's
good,
it might be the story is something not desirable. You think, glad I'm not you.
Well, you know, I'm not saying that every story is super desirable, but every story has a human root that we need to respect.
Yeah.
You have your story because of what you learned, or how you talked to, or what you explored or experienced, and so on and so forth. And my role is to get people to recognize these in themselves and in each other, and see how can we move forward in a positive sense, rather than simply saying, that's different, that's no good.
Yeah, I like that. Let's stop on that note.
Okay.
Thank you very much for listening. It's a great opportunity to share our perspectives with each other. And if you're interested in raising more questions or have ideas about topics that you'd like to see addressed in this podcast series, don't hesitate to make a note and let us know in the responses below. Thanks. Bye-bye.